Welcome along to today's masterclass. In today's masterclass, we're going to be talking about the positive impact of inclusive UX design and all the good things that come about through designing inclusively for your users. Just by way of introductions, my name is Andrew McRae. I'm our User Experience Director here at Logic and Magic. And I'm really pleased that we have a special guest speaker today with us today. A colleague and someone I've worked with over numerous years, Caroline Dixon. So Caroline, I wondered if you could maybe give yourself a quick introduction as well, please.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, I'm Caroline. I've been working for Belfast City Council for coming on over 20 years. And I'm from a marketing background. In the last 5 years, I've been focusing mainly on online communications, user experience, and website accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So you're going to hear from both of us today on different perspectives that we've got, different experiences, and also some elements of collaboration that we've been involved in this space with together. So what we're going to cover in the agenda is we're going to talk a little bit about what inclusive design actually is, especially useful, hopefully, for some of you that this might be new terminology or you're looking for a bit of an introduction to the topic. We're going to talk about what impact looks like and what it includes. So how do we know that inclusive design is making a difference? We're also going to talk and look at inclusivity in action. So where can this be evident in the real world and also through some of our own practice here at Logic and Magic? We're then going to talk about the steps to success. So how do you actually go about being an inclusive organization and putting things in place to design inclusively for your audiences? And then we're going to just share some useful tips and resources around, depending where you are in your own journey, what might be useful to kind of re-educate yourself on or get some useful resources going forward to help you navigate this interesting space within the UX world. So what is inclusive design? So inclusive design, if you look at it really holistically, it's about trying to design things, whether that be digital products, services, physical products, which is more than just all about being accessible. So accessibility is only really one part of the puzzle. Inclusion means much more than that. So it looks at the diversity of all of your users, your customers, your audiences, and thinks about how will this work best in those different environments that I'm trying to design for. And this diagram is an interesting way to kind of look at this idea of inclusive design, because it fits within the whole human-centered design or user-centered design landscape. And it's that mix between making it accessible, as in somebody or people can actually reach it. It crosses the line of usability, because without usability, it's not really much use if you can just reach something. But then it's inclusivity into the mix here as well, which looks at all different people, their characteristics, their diversity, and also some of their constraints and limitations. And that's where inclusive design will actually live and develop properly, when it's actually blended between accessibility, inclusivity, and importantly, usability. So Tim Berners-Lee here, who you see, who invented the web in 1989, his vision for the web and his real drive behind its use going forward was that it would be a universal product. It would be accessed by everyone, regardless of their disability, and that would be an essential aspect. And all these years later, it's quite easy to see that we're still not there. We're a long way off the mark in terms of equality of access, equality of experience, which is really what today is all about. So that's why we think this is still a really important topic to talk about, because the invention of the web was, at its heart, let's make this useful and accessible for everybody. And at times it is, and it's great when it is, but in numerous occasions it's really designed for people who use it the most, which isn't always looking at accessibility first. So to kind of frame I keep framing this accessibility landscape, it's really important to note that we might perceive our own groups as being maybe the people that we feel use the internet and so on, but it's really important to think about the diversity of people in the UK who may report having a disability, and this speaks globally as well, not just in the UK. But 1 in 5 people report having a disability, and that's estimated to be equating to over £80 billion of economic spending power in the UK. And that was back in maybe 2014. So I'd imagine that the spending power would be even more now. We also got to look at people who use technology. So we've used this broad term here, technology, but computer skills can sit across all forms of technology. And the real important things to look at when you see this graph are the two colors, green and gray. So gray represents the amount of people who can't use computers. So it averages out about 25% of the adult population are still in a position where they can't properly use at all technology. Whereas those people that are represented by green, so the strong in green, they are typically people that work in office jobs or are part of a younger generation who grew up with IT. So, when we think about that, that really represents highly the digital divide. And we have to always remember that our users typically aren't as proficient as using technology as we are. I'd imagine a lot of people on this call today are working in technology, either design or development, perhaps even marketing, but we're proficient because we need to use these devices day in, day out. Yet the things that we design for most of our users, customers, or audiences are for people who typically don't spend as much time on devices. So that digital divide is just so important to consider in this whole area of inclusive design. And one way to kind of think about this, if we were to sort of look at it metaphorically, but also in the real world, is that accessibility is a bit like having ramp access to a building. But inclusive design is where you go, okay, well, is that enough? No. Once people are actually here using our product or a building or a website, how can we make it inclusive? How can we make things easy to reach, easy to operate, built around us, as opposed to us having to make accommodations or sacrifices to use the technology? And another way to look at accessibility and also bringing now this disability into the mix is that perceptions of disability need to change if this is really going to change properly for everybody. And we think about inclusivity to include all forms of disabilities. And what we mean by that is that some disabilities, unfortunately, are permanent, but the ones that aren't permanent are still disabilities in that moment for particular users. And we have to think about people who are not only permanently disabled, which affects their ability to use technology, but are they temporarily impaired? Or are they impaired by a situation that could be the environment they're in, the people they're with, or the country they're in, for example. So one way to get this embedded within public sector organisations is gov.uk have done a really good job to produce these posters that are essentially their blueprints for designing with people for different levels of impairments, ranging from the autistic spectrum through dyslexia to people who are hard of hearing. And in these posters, it's really important to note that the do columns, if you were to look at these, you can look at these on the gov.uk website. By the way, very easy to access them. A lot of the do's are very consistent, regardless of the impairment that you're designing for or the use case that you're designing for. So that can include things like good color contrast, text legibility, clear linear layouts. So these design principles, we call them, are evident across lots of different interfaces, but when they're designing for a multitude of disabilities. So there is a lot of economies you can make when it comes to designing inclusively by just doing the right thing, by looking at your contrast, your text legibility, your screen layouts, and making sure that everything has appropriate labels. That can go a long way to solving problems for people with a wide range of impairments. And just to finish on this section, one way that we often talk about inclusive design and designing for people with different disabilities, whether they be situational, temporary, or permanent, is to get you in that mindset of design. Think about maybe designing for a pirate, in that the pirate has a range of these disabilities at that particular moment in time. So if you're a pirate, you're going to have some physical disabilities, because in this cartoon version of pirates that we know so well often, they've typically got like a claw for a hand, they've got a wooden leg. So there's your physical disabilities. They might also be temporarily impaired. So it might be that they're at sea, and they've maybe got a parrot speaking in their ear. So those are situational and temporary impairments. And they might also be intoxicated with alcohol. Again, if we take that sort of stereotypical view of an old pirate. So imagine we're designing for the pirate, because they've got a range of needs. Now, when it comes to reality, we don't design for pirates, we design for everybody. But that's just to get you in that mindset of thinking about, okay, not everybody is sitting behind a desk. Not everybody is able-bodied. Not everybody is working without distraction. And that's kind of what we're trying to get across here. So we're going to talk a little bit here about the impact and the importance. So what we mean by that is a number of things. The first is that when we design for disabilities, we often delight all. So this little cartoon here you see is the curb effect. So the curb cut effect that we, in the modern world, we are constantly exposed to this. Obviously, curbs being cut out so cars can move in and so on. But when we design for disabilities, everything improves. So whether you're in a wheelchair, whether you've got mobility issues, whether you're pushing some luggage or you're making a delivery, imagine if these curb cuts weren't around. Imagine the lack of ability to get things done efficiently. Maybe these are no doubt as well reducing injuries as well. So this idea that the curb cut is affecting everyone day to day is a good metaphor for things that are designed and everyone benefits, even though the original design was for disability. And we can see this coming across in a number of different interfaces as well as physical products. Everything from text messaging, which initially was designed for impairments, through to the OXO grip peeler, which again was initially designed for people with dexterity and strength issues. Yet by chance, well, not by chance, but almost by design, you would think it would be done for everybody. And just so be it, everybody preferred using this soft grip, easier to use peeler, regardless of their physical strength or their dexterity, because it's just simply easier to use. And then we have video captions, which again were originally created and designed for people with audio impairments, but now everybody is looking at a lot of content using video captions because it can be watched in silence, which is a really recent trend, of course, in how people use technology. So those are examples of when you design for disabilities, you can delight everybody. So again, just thinking a little bit more about the impact here and the business case for inclusivity. So inclusivity in design, it really does give businesses a leg up on the competition. So it's not just about making sure that people can access and use your products. Of course, if more people can do that well, then you're tapping into consumers who are hungry for innovation and they just happen to be impaired. But they're a big segment of your audience that you don't want to leave out. And some kind of stats to prove the point here are in front of you. So 70% is the performance gains that can be got by companies that prioritize inclusive design. We spoke about 8 billion being the UK spending power, but 8 trillion is what that equates to globally. 219% is the performance rating of organizations in the S&P that were design-led against the others that weren't design-led. 69% of customers with access needs will click away from a website that's too difficult to use. So, and I'm sure everyone here today as well has got hugely frustrated with websites and just decide, look, I'm not going to bother with this. But again, you can see that in black and white here as well. And then we spoke earlier about the 24% of citizens who have a defined disability. So that doesn't even include those that are situationally or temporarily impaired. So we really need to consider that statistic being higher. We're going to talk a little bit later as well about organizational culture and how inclusive design internally can also affect things positively for users and employees. But that middle statistic around the 20% around absenteeism being reduced is an important one to consider. So I'm going to hand over now to Caroline to talk through some really important things with regards to keeping yourself right in terms of legislation.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'm going to be looking here at the legal requirements that hopefully many of you are aware of. This is a bit of a mouthful, but the public sector bodies, websites and mobile applications accessibility regulations 2018. They require public sector websites and apps to meet specific accessibility standards. And these regulations build on the Disability Discrimination Act 1995 in Northern Ireland, and also the Equality Act 2010 in the rest of the UK. They're monitored by the Equality Commission in Northern Ireland and the Central Digital and Data Office in England, Scotland and Wales. So 2 parts to this legislation. This is what you have to do. You have to meet the accessibility standards, and you have to have an accessibility statement published for each site and each app that you have, and they need to be reviewed on a regular basis. So not to frighten anyone, but be prepared for the knock on the door. Back in 2020, during COVID as well, we were contacted by the Cabinet Office 7 months after going live with our new corporate website. And I think they were sort of going out to pick, not to pick on, but to identify some of the larger public sector organizations. So they carried out an audit of our site and gave us 12 weeks to make good on any non-compliance. If you're working further afield, there's other legislation that you need to be looking at. If you're a commercial business trading in the EU or states, you'll want to consider the European Accessibility Act 2025. It has a looming deadline of the 28th of June 2025, so do look into that. And for Europe, for America, it's the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that protects individuals with disabilities from discrimination and guarantees equal opportunity in the public and private sectors. Just a little note to say, obviously in the States, you're more likely to be sued. So definitely one to be aware of. Apart from all the legislation, it's all about doing the right thing. So what Andrew has already covered, we're reaching a wider audience by being more inclusive. And there's an ethical case for website accessibility in that we want people who have disabilities to be able to access things as easily as they possibly can. We all should be able to access the same information and services in the same way. So as a local council, we have a corporate social responsibility to be inclusive, not leave anyone behind. The difference between a commercial sector website and a public sector website currently is if you find a website selling shoes and you're getting frustrated with it, you just move on to the next website selling shoes. Unfortunately, you can't do that with your local council unless you want to move house into a different council area. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew, who's going to look at maybe someone who hasn't done the right thing, they haven't taken the right approach to inclusivity.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, so this example we picked out for today is Domino's, and it's quite a famous case study that was in this space where dragged on for a number of years, but it really started back in 2016 after a user of the website app, or I think it was actually the online website, was trying to use assistive technology to just simply order pizza. Yet, because the application hadn't been developed in a way that it should have, it wasn't able to be read. The URLs weren't accessible. The images weren't tagged up appropriately. And as a result, the user simply could not choose the pizza that they wanted. Now, that's not really the interesting part of the story. The more interesting part is that this user took it upon themselves to sue Domino's, and the legal case went on for a whole 5 years, actually, where it went in and out of different courts. It got escalated and then it got put back. And the settlement fee was only a mere $4,000 for the user, which is pretty poor. But the legal fees that amounted to was in the tens of thousands. But aside from those relatively low monetary values, the real damage that was done here was with regard to brand reputation for Domino's, in that, of course, they've probably recovered since then and no doubt done a lot of good things. I've read up they have done a lot of good things in this space in recent years. But they're one of a number of organizations that back then just really didn't take things seriously enough, and it really affected their brand reputation. That was the big piece that was damaged throughout that whole debacle. And what it also gained in terms of success, so was it really did raise awareness and perception amongst the general community, and also there's those with impairments that, you know, yeah, maybe big brands aren't doing enough to meet the needs of the users, and for an organization like Domino's, there really shouldn't be an excuse for that sort of thing. And we still see little bits of this happening today, but it's much less common because of what Caroline's already mentioned around the legislation that simply doesn't allow this to happen anymore on a grand scale, at least. So we're going to talk about another couple of examples here of inclusivity in action. One example that's a little bit outside of the digital interface world, and then a couple of examples of the work that we've done at Logic and Magic in this space as well. One of the pieces of work is actually the collaboration that we mentioned earlier around our work with Belfast City Council and Caroline's team. So this case study here is called Grace's Sign. And this little girl, who is much older now, Grace, she suffered from Crohn's disease. And when she was a young girl of this, at the age she is here, I think it was about 10 years ago, she was constantly getting a number of sort of negative experiences, if you want to call it that, from people who were looking at her or talking to her in a certain way, because she seemed perfectly healthy and able-bodied, but she was having to use disabled bathrooms because of her Crohn's disease condition. And she took it upon herself to kind of think about, well, what would make this a better experience for me or people like me? So she campaigned with the support of others to think about how can we put things in action so that people don't have a perception of me and people like me that we aren't just because we look normal. That's not the case. There are issues that we have that need us to use accessible toilets. So this whole hidden disability signage that you can see on the slide all came about through Grace, who is a Scottish girl, and her campaign then has gone more widespread than it was in her local village. So it's really just an example of how by people experiencing things for themselves, they can take action. And this is an example as well of designing for everybody, designing for disability, but it improves everyone's awareness and improves everyone's experience, because they know that when they see this signage, that it's not just your typical old school signage of the illustration of somebody in a wheelchair. It's about caring for people who might look, in your eyes, non-disabled or not having a disability, but we know in reality that there's so many hidden disabilities that we need to be aware of. So I think that was just a nice example to share, that that's how inclusive design in action can really benefit and improve the lives of not only Grace and people like her, but just everybody, and raise that awareness. So we've been lucky enough to work with a number of great organizations, public and private sector, in this space. But we thought we'd talk today about a couple of pieces of work that we've supported Belfast City Council and TransLink with, where there were significant parts of the project dedicated to inclusion, accessibility, and just that whole inclusive design area. So the first project it kind of spanned over a number of different iterations of a project around digital discovery that we worked with in collaboration with Belfast City Council, and a couple of other partners as well, responsible for technology development in this space. But some of the things that we done as part of this whole project that was around digital services across waste and open spaces, and lots of other different services, was we included in our project this whole ideology of, let's make sure that we seek out exclusion and not just go about making this project, oh, we must look after accessibility, or we must make sure that we speak to people, or we talk to people with impairments. It was much more than that. So we started out by doing a very robust accessibility audit of the digital services that were on offer, just to really understand the strengths and weaknesses of where, I guess if you look at it semantically, or just with regards to, without doing any further research, as a UX expert, how are these things stacking up from a digital perspective, from an accessibility point of view? As I said, we took it upon us to seek out points of exclusion and friction. So we made sure in all of our qualitative research that we tried to include as many people with different forms of impairments or exclusion as possible. So it wasn't just about looking at disability. It might have been different areas within Belfast that might have reported more instances of deprivation or low educational standards, and so on. Importantly, we conducted research and we done co-design with disability groups. So the council were lucky enough to introduce us to a disability forum that met regularly at the City Hall. And we were able to go along to some of those sessions where they met and kind of run a slightly different type of session with them, where we were actually getting to know them better, understanding their frustrations, doing testing with them on the current platform, but also then getting some insights and some ideas when it came to reshaping digital services around what might work for them, what might be better ways to present information, what might be better ways to present design. And that was really, really beneficial and important in this project. Beyond actually just doing that research phase as well, we sort of took it upon ourselves to kind of show leadership in this space and think about, okay, well, how do we start to embed this and educate the teams that we're working with within the council? So Caroline and her teams are really great at allowing us to kind of run knowledge transfer sessions where we were bringing them up to speed on all the great things we've learned around accessibility, inclusive design through those research methods with people that we needed to design for as part of the mix. And that helped us bring, I suppose, inclusivity to the top table, which is how we kind of articulated that internally, so that people within senior positions in the council, when they came to think about digital services, that they were being educated somewhat as with regards to who they're maybe not servicing well enough, and why it's so important to not have exclusion at all as part of their service. And then, of course, our design process and the outputs that we produced made sure that they had the appropriate inclusive design attributes, not only in terms of the interface, but also content guidelines and ways to go about engaging with people in the future with regards to some of their impairments or needs. So another project that we worked on was for TransLink, and it was all around service wayfinding and navigation in the city centre. We've done this project across Belfast, and we also done it in Derry/Londonderry, pretty much the same type of project. And this involved also auditing digital platforms. But there was a lot of work. We had the benefit, because of the nature of this project, to do a lot of ethnographic research, which is in-person, in-context research out on the street, working our way around the city, thinking about how would this actually be used with people who are impaired, whether that be temporarily, situationally, or permanently. And we got the chance to speak and interact with people with visual impairments, audio impairments, mobility impairments. And that affected everything, if you think about it, from using the digital technology, but also how accessible were the maps, the signage, and the information on board buses and trains, the audio cues you get, for example, or how well are the accessibility of the buildings and the platforms. So we looked at that right across the board. So what we were able to do was, again, that ethnographic research was so important. We were able to share insights internally. We were able to journey map out those kind of existing problems that existed at different stages, from awareness through to regular use of public transport within the city. And one of the great things that we were able to do was support redesign of maps, and also then give the teams at TransLink some important information on how to create accessible digital content, and train them on how to make that future-proof as well. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline now, just to kind of get a bit of a sense check on where you might be in your journey, and then she's going to share a little bit about her own and the council's journey with accessibility.
Thanks, Andrew. So this is for something just to do in your own head, in your own time, but just to think about where you are on your inclusive design journey. We sort of gauge this from a number of points. So, like, number one being early awareness, through to 2, preparing for change, 3, for actively engaged, 4, for optimizing, 5, you've really hit the mark and you're a master at that point. So it's just to think, whereabouts do you feel that you and your organization sits along that spectrum? And then I'm just going to take you through my journey with accessibility, and way back to when the legislation came out, and how we got to where we are today. So Andrew has outlined all the business case for inclusive design and how to create a more inclusive environment that benefits everyone. And I'm sure all of you are at different points of your journey. You may not have started, or you may be at the mastery side. But I was fortunate to be able to build in digital accessibility into the very start of the website redevelopment. And I know that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to do a bit of retrofitting, and that's okay too. But it was just very fortunate that the time that we were redeveloping the websites was matched in with the time of the legislation. So I was able to build everything into the procurement from the get-go. So the starting point, I would say you need to start with doing your own audit and planning for your journey, reviewing your site inside out, looking at the number of pages. What are the most visited pages? What would the most important pages be for someone with, for example, a disability? And that will help you prioritize the most important pages to your users. Then along the way, you may need support, and that depends on whether you have in-house developers or UX or designers and editors, or you need to look outside for suppliers. If you're going outside for suppliers, I would say be very clear in any specification of requirements that you are following the web accessibility standards. Make that very clear from the get-go. Bake that into the contract with your supplier, and just means that you're making inclusivity at the heart of all your redevelopment or development. Next step is understanding your user needs and trying to get to grips with the diverse needs of users with disabilities, including visual, auditory, motor, and cognitive impairments. And Andrew's touched on that, how we were able to tap into one of our disability groups they were just great to meet with, and we had a lot of learning from them. So it's not just about what abilities and disabilities people have, it's about finding out as well what devices they're using and what assistive technologies they use. And something to be aware of, people who use screen readers, they often use their own versions. So your site needs to be compatible with different versions of screen readers. So along this journey, I personally have had some key learning moments. Some you sort of look back and think, oh, that's embarrassing. But anyway, every day's a school day. So for example, went along to a deaf group session and learning that deaf people's second language is English, sign language is first. And that sounds so obvious now, but it made me really concentrate even more and in ensuring all our content was written in plain English, getting to the point without a lot of faffing. Next part of the journey was our testing and feedback. So throughout the whole process, we tested our website with user groups for accessibility issues, getting real user feedback, which was really brilliant. We set up sessions with people who have disabilities and got to gather insights and improve inclusivity. Just to give you another learning moment where I cringed as I watched a blind user getting frustrated by trying and failing to use our site. And this was down to some poor code in the navigation. But it's just one of those moments that you're sitting watching a video of someone trying to use our site and failing. But we take all these things away. It's all, you can only take them away as positives because that's something that you can fix and learn from and do better for your users in the end. Training and awareness, this is sort of moving more to the internal side of things. So we're quite a small team and we were learning at pace as we were going through this journey, trying to find out as much as we could about best practices in everything. So we were joining every webinar that was on and seeking out different training. And at the same time, we were trying to foster a culture of inclusivity internally. And that's a big challenge, and that's something that I'm sure everyone will come up against. Big challenge with a large organisation, but I'm sure it's similar in smaller organisations too. People just don't like change. So if you try to get them on board by explaining why things are changing, to get them on board and to explain that by being more inclusive, it will benefit everyone. And then there's the continuous improvement. The journey is never ending. Just when you think you've got there, it's never ending. It's an ongoing process. Every time you add any new content or you develop a new piece of the site, it needs to be tested. It needs to be compliant. And then you need to review your accessibility statements once again. And as well as that, you need to be keeping up to date with all the latest changes in any of the legislation as you go along. Then we're down to evaluation and audit. So two sides to this evaluation and audit. I manage 7 sites ranging from the larger corporate site of about 3,000 to 4,000 pages to smaller 50-page sites. And it would be impossible to know every web accessibility standard in WCAG 2.2 and to know whether you were compliant or not. It would just be impossible. So we do use a compliance tool. There are many tools available out there, and they will scan your site and tell you what's failing, what's compliant. And they're great, really, really great tools. And they help you to identify things like maybe poor color contrast on the site or navigation problems. So they'll give you like daily reports almost of what's good and what's not so good. But they don't replace the need for real user testing with assistive technologies. And this is what we call the manual accessibility testing. So this is where we get real users, real disabilities, and we set them tasks and we record the tasks to see where they're having difficulties. This is really insightful. I couldn't recommend it enough. It just shows you things that you can amend on your site will benefit everyone. So Andrew's covered this, saying if you do something inclusive for one, it helps everyone. Gov.uk has a great resource on that, and it has a recommended list of assistive technologies that you should test on. Once you have all your results of your audit and testing evaluation, it's a case of divvying out who's responsible for fixing each area. Is it a developer? Is it a web editor? Is it a UX issue? And we keep working through the list and carrying out any of the remediation work. So it is a long, ongoing process, but the learning from it is great and very insightful. Andrew's going to now talk about the importance of embedding this into the organization's goals and ethos.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And apologies if the slides hadn't quite caught up there with your run through. So yeah, what I'd like to talk about here is a little bit less about what the interface does for users and more about some organizations have taken this a little bit further and they've thought about inclusivity from the inside out. So what we mean by that is less about the organization presenting stuff to users in an accessible and inclusive way, which they do, but more around actually thinking about their own inclusive practice internally to benefit not only their staff engagement and respect for their staff, but also then how that manifests itself through the better products and better technology for their users as well. So if we take Lloyds Bank, for example, who you see there, they had a goal to double the representation of their colleagues in senior management positions to aim from 6% to 12%. And they actually achieved that target just last year. So again, they're looking at things from the perspective of they know that impairments represent a large demographic within society. And they've thought about, okay, well, that needs to be represented at all levels within our organization as well. They were also the first to offer Signally, which is a British Sign Language translation application, both on their Lloyds Bank and Halifax websites, which was fantastic. If you think about Monzo, which is another one here, one of the more popular banks in 2024, 2025, they've been doing things to address a lot of gender inequality. So the gender pay gap fell from nearly 10% to 8%. Their percentage of employees that were also female rose up to now almost equal. So it's at 48.5%, but before that it was down in the 29% range. And also women make up over half. So women make up over 56% of their board, with people of color making up 22% of their board. So they've tried to really address inclusivity in terms of employee status, employee engagement, employee diversity overall. And again, they're seeing the benefits of that coming through on lack of absenteeism, engagement, retention, and then of course, if people are working harder and working smarter and more engaged in their roles, ultimately the user experience in the product that is out the far side will be of a better thing forward as well. Microsoft, which you see there, the reason I've put them up as well is they've done a lot of similar things with regards to internal practice, but they are extremely forward thinking when it comes to inclusive design patterns and design best practice that not only are used across the whole Microsoft suite, but if you look at their case studies and you look at what they do and the research detail they go into and the guides that they publish, regardless of your industry, I think you'd find that pretty good reading and pretty insightful and helpful as well when it comes to managing your own design processes. And we'll talk about that really soon as well. Caroline mentioned the WCA guidelines, sometimes referred to as WCAG. And I'm not going to go into this in any sort of detail because if you're familiar with it or not, it's vast. And if you get the chance to read up on it, if this is quite new to you, I would encourage you to do so. But it's really what the principles of WCAG are about is what I'm hoping to describe just in less than a minute. And what it really does is it focuses in on 4 main areas, and hopefully you can see those clearly on the slide. It's about your application being perceivable, operable, robust, and understandable. And then all the criteria specific to design and functionality and software engineering all sit under those particular 4 categories. And really, the reason for presenting this slide just as simply as this is it only takes one of those areas to fall short, and it's no doubt, there's no doubt then your system or your app or your website will actually fail in terms of just basic accessibility. The importance of that POUR, P-O-U-R, to represent those 4 things can't be understated. And it's not just enough to be perceivable and operable if nobody can understand your content. It's not enough for it to have 99% uptime and be robust if people can't use it. So it's important that all of those things come together at once. Something that we also wanted to just touch on, just mainly, I guess, to give everyone here today a little bit of what does it look like from a design perspective to be inclusive when it comes to interfaces is if we think about inclusive form inputs, for example, what we've got here is what if your last name had a hyphen or dash in it? So believe it or not, so many organizations, including even Facebook, who were called out in this recently, if you are a user who has a hyphenated name, you have to go through then a completely different flow just because the form can't accept your hyphenated character within your name. So it makes you go through a whole new process just to fill in a form, just because, again, they're excluding you a little bit from just going through a more simple process that everyone else does for what seems to be quite a trivial thing that no doubt could be overcome simply. When it comes to text legibility and high contrast, again, this is stuff we see day in, day out, and we see different examples of it working poorly and working well. The examples here are quite poor because on the newspaper publication here, you actually see on the Globe and Mail, you've got so much text density that it affects the readability of what you're trying to get in and actually focus in on a particular article. And then on the other example for Twickets, I mean, you cannot read, and maybe you can't even see it on this screen, and that's to prove the point. There's gray text on the yellow screen, which again is going to pass all sorts of accessibility field checks, but also more importantly, from a box ticking exercise than that, it's more important that you actually make it readable for users, which this isn't doing. Plain English is another great example of where we can see good and bad practice on the design interface. So Netflix and gov.uk here are good examples that we've shown just to show how you can really just be really simple, really plain with your language, really concise as well, without having to make something sound particularly appealing or attractive. When it comes to getting users to go through a flow where they have to apply or sign up for something, this is when it's most effective. And plain English is just the best way for people to understand things, to get things done. Another thing is demographic identifier. So regardless of how you identify, I think it's important that the design needs to really catch up with people's diversity of identification. So you can see here that when in this application, if you start to put in your demographic identifier and you start to type how you identify yourself, it gives you as many options as possible so that users don't feel excluded from how they might identify themselves. Inclusive facets, what we mean by that are things like sorts, filters, navigation items within an application or site that allow you to work around based on your own terms rather than standardized terminology that an application might have chosen here. So you can see here that age ranges are displayed maybe slightly differently than they might on other sites. And again, that's just to help a demographic understand, okay, I'm in my 20s, 30s, 40s. Show me stuff that might suit my age group. And then when it comes to the hairstyles example on the right, again, these little illustrative elements, perhaps a little bit more clear than simply descriptive words, because you can get a sense of, okay, well, my hair kind of fits that kind of look, so I'm going to choose that. So it's ways that the design can kind of make it more inclusive so that takes out the guesswork, but it also talks on the terms of the user. And we can see this as well on applications too. So whether you're signing up for Basecamp or Microsoft product, a lot of times now you'll see your illustrations and your avatars represent a much more broad looking demographic of skin color, hairstyle, any sort of design that might affect the way that you see somebody with regards to religion or beliefs. So we can see that within the clothing and stuff like that as well. When we talk about designing with users for users, so this is an example of a framework called the 8 R's. So when you're going about, we've talked already about seeking out exclusivity so that you can design inclusively. But when you're designing with users and trying to do research with people with different levels of need, it's important to cover a number of areas. So we've sort of created this ourselves and called it the 8 R's. And why is it important? Because when you're doing this, it's important that you've got the right reach. It's important to work on how receptive people will be to you. So that's a communication challenge to get them on board with helping you in your desire to design accessibly and inclusively. Then if you got the resources, to actually locate and interact with people who you want to interact with. The representation is going to be important. How diverse a group are you actually engaging with, and does it represent the diversity of your audiences that you're trying to design for? Refinement is then more around when you actually start to nail down design decisions. How can I really refine this so that it is more usable, useful, accessible? Thinking back to that Venn diagram at the start for all of these people that I'm designing for. Then we also have responsibility. It is the responsibility of researchers and designers to make sure that this works and it's embedded within the organization and the product that you're designing for. And then we have reflection and results. So just like in Caroline's journey, it doesn't end with we've got something live. It ends with let's reflect, let's look at the data, and then let's go back and think about that problem at the start. Have we properly solved it, or do we need to look at it from a broader perspective? Something just before we get into the last couple of slides, something I wanted to touch on that I suppose that us at Logic and Magic, we think about all the time when it comes to connecting the dots with inclusivity. So we've talked primarily today about design and UX and digital products, with a little bit of other stuff peppered in, but none of that digital product or web or application stuff sits in isolation. There's always a brand story behind it. There's always maybe social media activity driving it if it's a business to consumer product. And then all of the content that will be fed into a platform or shared via the platform, and how accessible might it be. So what is important to consider is, it's one thing to consider your application or your site being inclusively designed, but then you got to think about your messaging and your consistency of messaging, and the platforms you're using, are they accessible and inclusive? Because if they're not, then you're actually you're diluting or you're damaging the effect of the work that you've done to make things inclusive. So we always think about these things holistically, and think about not only the brand language and the imagery and the iconography and the visual identity of things that we're trying to design for our customers being as inclusive and accessible as possible, but we're thinking about the content and the media choices as well, and what they look like and sound like, to make sure that they match and enhance the efforts of the inclusive design that we've done on the interface, and don't damage them. And that also includes then the training that we provide to our customers, and the importance as well of even looking at SEO. There would be very little value in putting all this energy into inclusive design when people are searching for specific things online. You're actually excluding them from accessing the product because it can't be found. So that's almost like, ironically, the wrong thing to do there. And then we're going to focus a little bit now just simply on resources, things that would be worth sharing, and looking up as well in your own time with regards to this area. So I'd encourage you to look at these practical guides. So gov.uk publish the WCAG guidelines. There's also the Design Council, who publish really great work on inclusive design. And then we also have an inclusive design guide for design and essential services here by Fair by Design, who do really great work. And all of these links you can see on they're there on the slide deck for you to take away, because this will be recorded and you can access it anytime. We've also got the Microsoft examples, which I shared before, which are fantastic. There's a regular newsletter you can sign up to called A11Y, which gives you all that kind of what's hot in the world of accessibility every week. And then Nisa and Norman Group give a really good range of content on accessibility and inclusive design as well, both video and just basic text format that I'd encourage you to look at. So that kind of concludes the meat of the masterclass. We'd love to invite any questions if anyone has any. And if you don't mind, Caroline, I'd love it if you do see any come in, if you could read them out, because I can't actually see the screen at the minute, just with the way my setup is. But if people have any questions, please do post them in the chat. We'd love to see if we could get answering some of those in the time. So we'll just give it a minute or two to see if any questions do come in. We've also got some fairly typical ones that we get all the time that we can sort of touch on as well.
So we have a question in asking, are there any auditing tools you would recommend?
I think that really touches on the things that you had mentioned, Caroline, didn't it? In your block, those automated tools.
Yeah. Now, In my position in the public sector, I can't really recommend a particular supplier, but I would say do go on and look up some of the automated tools. Just using like the keywords, accessibility, compliance, auditing tools, and you'll see all. I mean, there's like a top 5, but do go in and have a look at them and see the different features that they offer. And you could even set up a one-to-one with some of the suppliers to see if they're a good match for your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I could add, there's also plenty of webinars on YouTube on this. So even going into YouTube's a good move to look to see who's offering the website compliance tools.
Yeah. Any other questions there, Caroline? Or was that the only one so far?
That's the only one I'm seeing.
No problem. I'll maybe.
Sorry, Andrew, before you continue, can I just add, you were talking about gov.uk. They have actually just come up with they've done an accessibility monitoring report of all the public sector websites that were done from 2022 to 2025. So that's out at the minute, if anybody wants to have an interesting read at that.
Yeah, that's a really good takeaway. Like the stuff that gov.uk publish, again, it's just so useful. Even though it's designed initially it's designed primarily, obviously, for public sector. It's so useful just in terms of best practice. That alongside Microsoft, probably the 3 highlights for us. I'll maybe share just a couple of sort of typical things that we often get asked. Sometimes we get questions around, can you give an example of a UX fail when it comes to inclusive design? A really good one was Procter & Gamble, who are a beauty brand. So they were testing a particular type of soap dispenser, which was an automated soap dispenser that they actually tested with a number of users, and then when they put it in live and put it in bathrooms, what happened was people with different skin tones, a darker skin tone, found that it wasn't working as well as it should have done, and they had to take it out and go back to the design lab and reconfigure this whole product. And really, you might not believe this, but it was down to them not really testing with enough skin types in order for it to work well for those darker skin tones. So you can understand maybe the frustration that caused, but also that's an example where it's staring you in the face that how did you not design for everybody that needed to use the product, not just people with a particular skin tone.
There's another question in, how have you upskilled internal teams, processes to think about accessibility throughout the product life cycles?
I suppose maybe both had experience of that, but I'll maybe yes, we've done a number of things internally, probably that range from informal to more formal. So on the more formal side, we've had a number of our teams take specific training in this area by Nielsen Norman Group, sort of one of the world's most renowned UX training organizations. So just going through the principles, the importance, but also then proper hands-on articulation and demonstration of how to go about auditing and rectifying things through design. Then we would do sort of knowledge transfer within the organization. So people who take that course come back and they do a group share and produce documentation that we can work through ourselves as teams. So that's something we've always been pretty good at across the board, but also then with inclusive design, that's how it's manifested. I think other ways that we've upskilled is just we've made sure that we work in teams. So we've been fortunate enough over the years to have dedicated research staff and research teams that when we're working on projects, they involve the design team. They even involve the project team. and they would involve others as well where possible, in the engagement with the product, in the engagement with research, with users, so that then people learn by doing as well, not just by having to take a course. And then we also subscribe to A11Y, and we make it part of our remit to just keep on top of what best practice looks like. And those guidelines that Caroline shared, they're evolving and changing all the time. So it is important to keep on top of that stuff. So I guess just working in the industry, it kind of goes without saying, you keep a close eye on social media in your inbox with regards to legislation. So that's kind of how we've managed it at Logic and Magic over the years. Any ways with your own organization in the council, Caroline, that you've embedded this or skilled up?
I was going to add to that, Andrew, very important, which is often overlooked, is the plain English training. So we have all of our team is trained in writing in plain English, and there's a lot of content on our site. So we need to be pretty strict on, I've actually written sort of web style guidelines. So we make sure that anyone who's submitting content is aware what style we're using, and also to get them to understand why we're using that language. So people aren't coming on to Belfast City Council for a nice browse through the website. It's actually to do something, to carry out a task, or to find out some information. So we need to get that information clearly to the customer as quickly as we can.
Yeah, that's so important. Just, sometimes taking away is more important than adding, isn't it, when it comes to simplifying things? So I'll maybe finish on this one if there's no more questions, but one thing that is often asked is, like, how do you measure it? How do you measure the impact of your inclusive design? And it depends on industry. It depends a lot on whether you're business to business or business to consumer, or whether you're an internal application that doesn't have a conversion element. But a lot of the ways that can be measured are actually the ways that you'd measure all of your points of success. But you just have to make sure that if you get less of the complaints in regards to your NPS score, or tickets for people who can't use things well enough, those sort of data points should always improve or get better as you start designing for inclusivity and accessibility. But the other way that you should go about testing this and making sure that it works is get out there and get off your desk and get off your chair and get out into the wild, both metaphorically and physically where possible, and actually see how this stuff's being used. Because sometimes organizations can sit on quite good conversion rates or revenue rates and go, well, we're obviously doing a good job and loads of people are accessing our product and buying it. But you don't know what that untapped potential is, I guess, until you go out and see how well it performs with people with impairments. And very often that's hard to do just looking at data, unless you get people to identify who they are and what issues they have through feedback surveys and questionnaires, but you're unlikely to get everybody doing that. So I think I'd encourage you to look at all the data points that you have for your system, regardless of accessibility or inclusivity. When you put these things in practice, do they go up? Great, because it means probably what's happened is they've made a difference to those people that need it, but also everybody, like those simple design products. But then the most important one is get out of the building. Tim Grubb, famous saying, when he worked in an agency, get out of the building and see for yourself and test it, and get into the hearts and minds and behaviors of people and see what they're dealing with. And if it's good, great. If it needs improvement, then that's when you need to do something. I'm assuming there's no more questions. We might just wrap up here if there isn't. One of the things that I wanted to finish on was actually via the link or the QR code. We're offering those people that have taken the time to watch this today the chance, if you are in need for support, or even just a really good starting point when it comes to getting you on the journey to inclusive and accessible design, We're offering a draw for you to be entered into an opportunity to get 50% off an accessibility audit done by our agency. So if you get the chance now or when you watch this back, please visit the link where you'll be able to fill in a quick survey where then we can put you in the draw basically for that offer. So thank you. And the last thing to do is to thank you all for giving up your time to watch this. Hopefully you got a few things out of it. Caroline and myself are available on email if you have any questions or want to reach out to us. But Caroline, if you have anything you'd like to say again?
No, thank you.
Great. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.